Welcome to this episode of the Business of Practice podcast, where we focus on the financial and human sides of equine veterinary medicine. In this episode, Nina Mouledous, DVM, Trust Veterinarian for the AVMA Trust, is going to talk to us about protecting yourself against malpractice in pre-purchase exams. I'm Kim Brown, editor of Equine Management. The Business of Practice podcast is brought to you by CareCredit. Thank you, Dr. Mouledous, for joining us today to talk about this important topic.
You're welcome, and thanks for inviting me.
Could you talk to us a little bit about malpractice? And I know you like to first define what a veterinarian is as a professional. So let's start with some of the basics.
Okay, so yeah, it's a good idea to first identify the definition of a professional, let's say, as we are talking about veterinarians. And this is the definition that they use in the legal arena and the state boards. And it is what a licensed veterinarian, by the virtue of the license granted, is presumed to possess at least ordinary skills, knowledge, and competence. So when a veterinarian is alleged that they were negligent, the definition of malpractice is the failure of that veterinarian to use such reasonable skill and diligence as are ordinarily expected of a careful, skillful, and trustworthy veterinarian. So malpractice, negligence, practicing below the standard of care, all of those terms mean the same thing. But when we look at malpractice in the sense of malpractice claims, the review, or when a case is looked at, they're really looking at the standard of care and whether the standard of care was met or not. And that relates to a lot of times, two things can happen when a client is upset with a veterinarian. If they happen to, let's say, miss something on a pre-purchase exam, they can file a malpractice claim or board complaint. And what it boils down to is standard of care. And the easy definition of standard of care would be what is determined to be what a reasonable veterinarian would do in a particular situation. So I just wanted to throw that out there, the easy definition of standard of care.
Okay, and that's really good for everybody to think about. So why should a good vet worry about malpractice?
Good question. And that's another loaded question. First of all, I will remind everyone that we do live in a very litigious society in the United States. Interestingly, we only have 5% of the world's population, but we have 94% of the lawsuits compared to anyone else. We have more lawsuits in the United States than any other country. We are only 5% of the world's population, but we carry 94% of the lawsuits. So only 6% of lawsuits are with the other 95% of the world.
Good.
I mean, it's mind-boggling. But, the unexpected adverse outcomes will occur. And when we're talking about pre-purchase exams, this is usually an economic loss, or the buyer didn't purchase what they were expecting. So it was an unexpected adverse outcome. And people, of course, in the equine industry place very high values on those animals. Oftentimes they're very expensive. And so expectations for a veterinarian, unfortunately, to look in the crystal ball, so to say, to determine that this horse is going to be okay for the rest of the time that buyer has it, is a really high expectation that we have to try to fulfill. So we need to make sure that we do a good job and check all the boxes and dot all the I's and cross all the T's to try and limit our risks of client complaints when it comes to pre-purchase exam.
And pre-purchase, just to talk about why we are talking about this topic today, is the number one reason for malpractice claims against equine vets?
It's up there. It's certainly in the top 5, and it varies from year to year, and it has been number one in years past. They are certainly one of the higher payout claims that we deal with if they do go into suit. The top 6 more common equine malpractice complaints are pre-purchase exams. I would put that at the top of the list. Rectal tears, which oftentimes are considered an inherent risk, but it's a common complaint. Anesthetic complications, and the most common in that category are recovery injuries. And then consent, client consent and miscommunication. Injection complications such as intra-articular, IV, and IM complications. Castration complications is in the top 5, and that's because it's one of the more common it is the most common surgery performed in equine practice out in the field. And then to round that up, colic cases. So those are more common categories. And I would say that pre-purchase exam is probably always in the top 3, depending on the year.
Okay, so could you walk us through what happens how does the veterinarian find out about these claims, and what happens from the time that something is made, either a lawsuit or a claim to the vet board, until the vet is informed, and then what happens after that? What do veterinarians do if they've never been in this situation?
Well, a couple of scenarios can occur. Oftentimes, unfortunately, when it comes to equine complaints, a veterinarian is just slapped with an attorney demand letter or a summons for a lawsuit, and which is unfortunate because with the AVMA Trust program, we can avoid all that by intervening early if we know that there's a complaint out there. But if a client does get an attorney, if a veterinarian does receive a letter from an attorney demanding something related to a pre-purchase exam, for instance, or any allegation of negligence, just remember that's just an attorney letter. That doesn't mean that you're getting sued already. And they'll throw that out there and demand that you turn this over to your insurance carrier, or demand that you pay, write them a check for X amount of dollars by April 30th, and this will all go away. Don't let that scare you. Again, it's just an attorney letter. It's not a subpoena, but that is grounds to contact your malpractice insurance carrier and report the demand and let them handle it. Do not try to take care of these things on your own if you do receive an attorney letter. You don't want to get in the middle of that. The other scenario would be if you are subpoenaed and there's a lawsuit. Of course, at that point, you want to immediately turn it over to your insurance carrier and let them handle it. But oftentimes, the veterinarian will just hear word of mouth. Equine practice and the equine industry is a very small world, right? And the veterinarian may just hear, ripples of a client complaining or unhappy with their purchase, and, finding out maybe from the seller or the seller before that seller that this horse, I can't believe they passed that horse. It had XYZ, and if a veterinarian does hear, or they may even hear directly from the buyer that the buyer is unhappy with the way the pre-purchase exam went down, then we highly recommend that you reach out to that buyer and find out exactly what's going on and get as much information as you can. Be very polite and respectful and open and transparent that you want to work with them. Because oftentimes, if you open up those lines of communication and let them know that you want to work with them and that you can turn it over to your insurance carrier for a third-party review at no cost to them, then, that's the way to handle it. And hopefully we can avoid attorneys and lawsuits. If you, cop an attitude or get all huffy and puffy that, this was a complete exam and, you didn't do this and you did this right and didn't do that, whatever they're alleging. A lot of times that's just going to anger the buyer and, provoke them to file a malpractice or, get in touch with an attorney or file a lawsuit and oftentimes, start bashing you on social media or things like that. So I know it's, your feelings get hurt and you get defensive, but that's why you have insurance. And if they're, if they, are damaged in some way, or they did not, purchase the horse that they thought they purchased according to the pre-purchase exam, then, it's time to open up those lines of communication, and let's, work as a team to try and come to a reasonable, solution that both parties are happy with. That's why you have insurance. And it can be hard to do that, but we really find that that's, the best way, to save, face with everyone, and just consider it as a business, decision that we're going to work with this client and try and resolve their complaint.
So what I'm hearing is, as soon as the veterinarian has an inkling that something may be going a little south, that they should get as much information as they can, as politely as they can, and inform their insurance carrier.
Correct. When they do, if the client, if the buyer is demanding and alleging that you were negligent, then that is grounds to trigger your malpractice policy. And, what you're going to want to get from the buyer is a demand letter outlining exactly what they want, and outlining the onus is on the buyer to prove that the veterinarian was negligent. Claims are just not settled on assumptions. There has to be proof. They're going to need, an expert opinion on whatever the situation may be. Let's say, for instance, the buyer is alleging that the veterinarian missed an OCD lesion in the stifle radiographs. Then that buyer is going to need proof from their primary veterinarian, or whoever the veterinarian was that found that lesion. We're going to need a radiographic report from that second veterinarian, opining that the lesion was on the pre-purchase exam films and was missed. And I will add, that it is the most common cause for pre-purchase malpractice exam claims relates to missed radiographic lesions. So, we can talk about that all day long too. And if I was in practice again, I think I would probably send my pre-purchase exam radiographs off to a boarded veterinarian and get their opinion, and just, build that cost into what I charge for the pre-purchase exams. That way, and that actually adds value to that horse. If you have a board certified equine radiologist opining that these radiographs are clean, or whatever whatever the lesions are that the expert is saying this or that, then that's attached to that horse for the next, if they happen to want to resell that horse. I mean, that really increases the value. So I know that's asking a lot, but believe me, at the end of the day, we all know when it comes to reading radiographs that, you can stare at them for a long time and go back and look at them the next day and see something that you didn't see the day before. They tend to grow legs sometimes.
Well, and that's a great tip, is to add that boarded vet in to look at the radiographs. What other tips can you offer to veterinarians to try and avoid malpractice complaints in these pre-purchase exams?
Well, can we, after I've been with the program going on 14 years now, and after reviewing hundreds and hundreds of malpractice claims, Dr. Cynthia McKenzie and I both came up with a tip sheet for equine practitioners to help avoid malpractice complaints. And at the top of the list is to avoid conflicts of interest. Attorneys love it when there's a conflict of interest, because that really can open a can of worms. If that claim ends up in front of a jury, that attorney has a lot of food for fodder. And what that means is that if the veterinarian that's providing the service of a pre-purchase exam has a relationship with the seller, or if anyone in the practice has a relationship with the seller, then that is a conflict of interest. And the first solution would be to decline the exam and refer to another veterinarian outside of the practice. That's the safest thing to do. If that is not possible, which in many cases it's not, because the buyer insists that practice does the pre-purchase exam, or, there isn't another practice, in the near vicinity that could provide that service, then the veterinarian should recommend to the buyer that they obtain the past medical history from the practice. So they're going to have to get the seller's the seller's consent to obtain the past medical history. And that buyer should, have that medical history to look at before the exam in case they have any questions about what has been done to that horse at that practice. Obtaining and going along with conflicts of interest, obtaining permission to disclose the complete medical history, and then recording everything, especially what the buyer declines. We all know, buyer, oh, doc, just x-ray his feet and hocks. That's all I care about. Well, you want to go a little further and make sure that buyer checks off the boxes that they decline a full set of radiographs, and providing a complete high quality imaging study of all the joints in question is really important. If you miss the knees or don't radiograph the stifles, that's going to be the joint that's going to be problematic in the future, of course. Yeah. So you need to at least offer a full set of radiographs and let the buyer decide, and also educating the buyer on the importance of a complete radiographic study. So those are the top two. Also, whatever possible, you want to provide pictures or videos, especially with absentee buyers. We have a whole nother list of tips for absentee buyers, but in this day and age, just taking videos of the flexion test and the jogging, the conformation, the height of the horse, all of that is going to be part of that pre-purchase exam report and could be important. Recommending a blood test is a big one. I know it can be expensive, but we have so many pre-purchase exam claims where the veterinarian says the horse was perfectly sound and didn't show any signs of lameness, and the buyer buys the horse, and of course, a couple of weeks later, it starts limping. And the first question is, did you recommend a blood test? And if the client, at least recommend it. And if they decline it, make them check that box, because you have no idea what that horse, what they gave that horse while you were pulling up the driveway. They might have, given him a big blast of Banamine, and of course he was sound that day. Mm-hmm. And also consider genetic testing for genetic diseases, especially with the quarter horses. We've had several claims related to heritable diseases that were not apparent at the time of the sale, and the horse ended up having it. And to round out these tips, make sure you obtain an accurate age. Try to look at the papers, or if there's a microchip, anything that you can prove the age of the horse. Now, oftentimes, veterinarians just go by what the trainer says. And we all know they're 12, right? They've been 12 for years. But try to obtain the age by looking at the dental arcade, but you really want to try and back that up, if possible, with any sort of registration papers. We've had several claims related to age discrepancies.
Yeah.
And when it comes to your pre-purchase exam report, we want to make sure that report is very comprehensive. The more, the better. We've had pre-purchase exam reports that are half a page, and we've had reports that are 10 pages long. More is better, where you can really check off all the boxes, make sure all the systems have been examined, ophthalmic, respiratory, neurologic, integument. And when talking about skin, you want to make sure that you check for surgical scars, right? Especially, if the horse has happened to have a abdominal surgery, a previous colic surgery, that horse is not insurable. So you want to do everything you can to really look at that horse under a fine-tooth comb and document any scars, and at least check the box that you checked for an abdominal scar. And then always consider having a liability release forms incorporated into your pre-purchase exam report that, really has the buyer sign off that, this horse looks normal on this day, and, this is, it's just basically a release of liability that they can't, come back at you, after this exam. Of course, a lot of people think it's only worth the paper it's written on, but it does make the buyer think, that, this is, you are not held, out for, however long, after the exam, because we've had pre-purchase exam claims 1, 2, 3 years after the veterinarian. Yeah. And if there's something on the pre-purchase exam films that wasn't disclosed, then that's just another notch in the belt that could be a weak defense for a veterinarian. So I know that's a long list, but we do have those on the AVMA PLIT website, and we always have them at our booths, especially at AAP. We've had them in newsletters, and we try to provide it to all our equine practitioners to have in their back pocket to help guide them.
We'll make sure to get a link, because there will be an article on equine management that goes along with this podcast, and we'll put a link in that article to those tip pages so that you can go right to the AVMA PLIT website. The Business of Practice podcast is brought to you by CareCredit. CareCredit keeps equine veterinarians at the heart of care by providing horse owners with simple, budget-friendly financing options. By bridging the gap between cost and care, CareCredit supports healthy financial relationships between veterinarians and their clients. It can help them move forward with care a horse needs whenever and wherever it's needed. Are there any other tips that you have to help vets avoid malpractice complaints?
No, that's that list that I just gave you. Avoiding conflicts, making sure you recommend full set of radiographs, blood testing, ask if they want to test for genetic diseases, try to get an accurate age. Providing a comprehensive, detailed pre-purchase exam report where the client is actually checking off what they're declining and what they're accepting, or really the things that you want to really make sure that you do. I will say that a couple of the oddballs, most of our pre-purchase exam claims are related to lameness, right? Or radiographic lesions that weren't disclosed at the time of the pre-purchase exam. That's about 80% of our claims. But we do have a couple oddballs, for instance, ophthalmic issues. So you want to make sure that you do a really thorough ophthalmic exam. And if there's anything that looks funny about that eye, then recommend that they have an ophthalmologist look at the horse's eyes, and that you're not an ophthalmologist, you're just a general practitioner. And if there's an age discrepancy, that's something you want to explore as well. And we've had a few claims related to deaf horses. If you're doing a pre-purchase exam on a paint, that might be, one that could have an inheritable deafness. You want to try and do everything you can to make sure that horse can hear. Height. We've had claims related to height where the client, the veterinarian measured the horse at 14.2 and it was an absentee buyer. And then when it, shipped across the country and, the buyer, came off the van, the buyer was not happy with the size of the horse. So more is better. You really want to try to look under every stone when it comes to pre-purchase exams. And I know that's a lot of work, but you already do spend a lot of time with these, and, make sure that you are compensated for that time. But again, more is better.
And of course, through all this, as you've mentioned before, communication, make sure, I'm just re-emphasizing what you have stated, is that make sure you're talking to your clients, that if you tell them what you recommend, that you think they should have a blood test, you think they should have an eye exam, you think whatever it is, and that if they choose not to, that they acknowledge in writing that they have chosen not to.
Exactly. Whatever they decline, you make sure they check that box and initial it, because they don't hear everything you say, right? And verbal accounts just don't hold up in the legal sense. You really want to back all that up with hard copy documentation. And a lot of this, can be done ahead of time, especially when it comes to absentee buyers. You may want to send the report to them ahead of time and have them check and initial what they want and what they don't want. That way, it's already done. And then, again, I can't stress enough about pictures and videos. You may even want to, have a FaceTime appointment with that absentee buyer while you're doing the exam, or make sure they're available in case there's anything that comes up. You can show them the horse, you can stand next to the horse, or, just there's so many things that we can do nowadays with technology that can help make sure that that buyer is, can see what's going on, because those are can be really problematic when a veterinarian's trying to do a pre-purchase exam for an absentee buyer.
And I think I want to ask one more question, because the price of horses, even a trail horse, has gone up astronomically in the last 5 years. So just because maybe a veterinarian isn't doing high-end competition horses doesn't mean if they're doing a pre-purchase for even a trail horse that this isn't something good to consider, doing all of these steps.
Absolutely. It's all about informing the buyer of everything that you see. And, you are doing, it doesn't matter what the horse is, the intended purpose or how much it costs, it still should be very thorough, especially when it comes to your physical exam, as far as looking at the eyes and making sure it can hear, and the age, and anything that doesn't really require extra costs like radiographs, hands on, just really getting down and just, like I said, looking at every system and checking off those boxes, because the client can always say that if it, wasn't disclosed or wasn't apparent, or they weren't informed of this, particular situation, whether it was a tumor on the eye or a scar, they can always say that they would never have bought the horse had they known.
Right. Well, is there anything else that you would like to add, Dr. Mouledous?
I think we've covered a lot of it. Like I said, I would always, more is better. And I would just definitely take a look at these tips when you do provide the link. It's a good reminder to look at them, a couple times a year, and have, empower your staff to help guide you to make sure that all of these little boxes are checked, to make sure that you are doing a complete exam to help decrease pre-purchase malpractice claims.
Oh, that's a great idea. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mouledous, for joining us today. And just a note that Dr. Mouledous gave a very comprehensive presentation on pre-purchase exams and equine malpractice claims at the 2021 AAP convention. And you can read a summary of that presentation, a separate article, on equimanagement.com by searching for the title, From AAEP Convention 2021, Preventing PLIT Claims for Equine Pre-Purchase Exams. And we will also include a link to that article on this podcast article. So thank you for joining us for the Business of Practice podcast. And big thanks to our sponsor, CareCredit. We invite you to visit equimanagement.com or your favorite podcast network to hear each episode of the Business of Practice. Make sure to follow and rate this podcast. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can send an email to me at kbrown, that's the letter K Brown, at equinenetwork.com. The Business of Practice podcast is a production of the Equine Podcast Network, an entity of the Equine Network, LLC.